Do you need a microphone?
Hello, everyone. Is it on? Yeah. Norman, I need you to stop. Okay, we're here at Armory Center for the Arts. Thank you for coming. My name is Irene Georgia Tsatsos. I'm the organization's Director of Exhibition Programs and Chief Curator. And I'm really happy to be here in our third and final event, Into the Radical Imaginary, organized by Janet Sarbanes. It's been really great to be able to host this event. I've really appreciated your work, Janet, and all the people that have been a part of this project. I want to thank a few people. I want to thank Alali Tostado and Crystal Ramirez, both from the Armory, that have been really helpful in a lot of the management of this project. Jackie Hensey and David Stallworthy, both from, I think both, right, from the Aesthetics and Politics program. Both of you are from, huh? Oh, sorry, creative writing, aesthetics and politics. Okay, great. And Henderson Bloomer, thank you for your support. And thanks to CalArts' Office of Alumnus Relations, which is hosting a reception afterwards at Der Wolf around the corner. I hope you all know about that. You are all invited. Again, thanks to CalArts. If it's raining, we won't go. It's an outdoor event. I think those are all the notes I was going to say. Just keeping it very housekeeping, letting Janet do the introductions and remarks. One final thing, where we do require masks for everyone. The speakers may not wear them if they choose not to, but we're asking everybody else to keep their masks on. So thanks all.
Hi, everyone. I too want to welcome you to the third and final lecture in the Radical Imaginary series, co-sponsored by the Armory and Aesthetics, MA in Aesthetics and Politics at CalArts. I'd like to thank Irene, who is actually an illustrious alumna of our program, and Crystal, Alali, and the rest of the team at the Armory for their generous hosting of this collaboration, and Jackie, David, and Alicia at CalArts for making the series possible from our side. I also want to thank all of you for your engagement over the course of this series. I recognize some people who have been at every talk, and also for being here tonight if you haven't come before. I conceived of this series as a way to gather and think through the challenges of our moment. They theory. As people globe insisting that the world not only should be, but can be reimagined and remade, the question emerges, what ways and practices, political and aesthetic, can take us further into the radical imaginary? Our guests tonight, Bojana Cvejić and Anna Vujanović, have made a 17-hour trip to be with us, an especially valiant journey in these still pandemic times. Originally from Serbia, Bojana joins us from Brussels, where she teaches at PARTS, and also Oslo, where she is professor at the National Academy of the Arts. And Anna, also originally from Serbia, now joins us from Berlin, where she teaches at HZT, University of Arts, and also Amsterdam, where she teaches at SNDO, University of Arts. The minute I finished reading Anna and Bojana's collaboratively written book, Towards a Transindividual Self, I started plotting how to get them to CalArts and here to the Armory. In their individual and collaborative work as artists, theorists, and activists, they model the kind of transdisciplinary practice we seek to cultivate in the MA Aesthetics and Politics at CalArts, and which I believe results in precisely the deep, comprehensive, and committed analysis that is so badly needed in this moment. The same can be said for their ongoing long-term collaborative process. Towards the Transindividual Self does crucial work to understand the role of art and performance in both upholding and potentially undoing the hyper-individualism of our era. Drawing on a wide range of philosophical, artistic, and political approaches to the relationship between individuals and collectives, It challenges us to rethink on a profound level the easy marriage of art and individualism in order to enable new solidarities to emerge and help us understand those that are right now emerging. I want to mention that the book has sold out its first printing in Europe. Great. But Bojana and Anna have some copies on hand for those of you who are interested in getting your own. And I want to reinforce Irene's invitation to the reception after their talk, which will go for about 50 minutes with time afterwards for questions and discussion. So please join me in welcoming Anna and Bojana.
Thank you, Irene, and thank you, Janet, for inviting us and hosting us and introducing this book with these lovely words. Do you hear me? Yes. Okay. Into the microphone. And I'm sorry about this asymmetry. We enjoy now this pleasure of not having the mask while watching your faces disappear. In our title, we instigated the word futures. And it seems that there are two temporal strategies we could choose from. We could exhaust the critical diagnosis of the present, in which case we would be debunking individualism here and hope that it will indicate a desirable future. Or we can stay in the present and try to recognize and magnify visibility of the signs that are some kind of promises of an altogether different political horizon. In our case, it's transindividuality. It will be the latter that we will take as our approach here. Now, why transindividuality, and what does this neologism stand for, and what can this initially philosophical concept do for us in outlining a political future, which can be glimpsed from a few existing and historical practices, processes, techniques, artifacts in art, but also extended to sociopolitical, cultural activism. For starters, I will unfold the concept by speaking of two distinct philosophical lineages from which we selectively draw out several important characteristics. One that emphasizes the ontological register, kind of philosophy of nature, and another which has a more decisive sociopolitical orientation. So the term transindividuality is coined by Gilbert Simondon, who revived the individuation of medieval philosophical principles, not anymore as a principle which accounts for how every non-living and living thing becomes specifically different, but as a process, or in French, opération, which is always larger and richer, temporally infinite, containing more dimensions and more relations that becoming individual, which is also a social relation proper. Now, what's interesting about Simondon and why we draw upon him is that there is a philosophical maneuver that inverts a path of individuation, where the individual is no longer a goal, but is only a passing phase, and the ontological weight shifts to the instance that is prior and at the same time part of being the pre-individual nature. In Simondon, this is a metaphysical notion that is somewhat philosophically maybe vague, similar to the unlimited nature in pre-Socratic philosophy. But let's say for now that we can equate it with the potential for future transformations. And this potential is never exhausted. It is passed on and inherited in every individual thing, which also includes inorganic matter in Simondon. And it remains in every phase of individuation as a reserve or a margin of a potential change, which in fact enables difference in becoming. So if every individual is only a phase, independently of how individualized it appears, it aggregates a metastable system, a system of mutual relations, of reciprocal changes in which everything that is involved necessarily changes in a kind of reciprocal coevolution. So individuals cannot just be or change by virtue of their own effort or by deliberate decision. So an important a feature of this process is that it functions as an ecosystem. So as a process, it can be reduced to what we are so accustomed in Western philosophy, the dichotomy of subject-object, something that is individuated and that there's an individuator for that. Because it always entails distinct functions through which everything circulates, three functions, relations of agency, relations of being an element as produced by individuation, or being an environment that supports as a ground or hosts individuation. Well, in Simondon, the examples come from biology and thermodynamics, but for us the wager was to think the ecosystem of individuation through examples of how we live, how we work, how we create and act together. So if we want to retrace the development of an individual or an artwork, a performance which I'm making, and is always a collaborative affair, or an institution, a school in which I teach or study with others, it can never be attributed to the endeavor of one or more individuals, or it cannot be measured by a goal that we take as an outcome that it reach. In fact, in order to describe the genesis of these instances, I should note that sometimes the elements act as subjects that drive the process. In other moments, they contribute by hosting or holding space for others that are agents. And at the same time, everything is an element that is modified by the process reciprocally. That means that these in an ecosystems, these functions alternate, and we acknowledge, therefore, multiple and different kinds of relations. Now, there is obviously a certain abstraction and vagueness in the model that I just sketched, but this indeterminacy of the pre-individual in Simondon licensed political thinkers from Marxist provenance to rematerialize and weaponize this notion, particularly in the work of Paulo Virna and Bernard Stiegler that was influential for our book. And that means that the pre-individual nature is a common heritage of human species with its natural and historical components, consisting of cognitive capacities, which we could reduce in one word to general intellect. The fact that we speak language, that we share faculties of perception, memory, capacity to create, to collaborate, as well as the historical institutions like political economic system of modes, means, social relations of production. And this is what we mean when we invoke the term pre-individual. And in the second part of the talk, Anna will demonstrate how transindividuation evolves from materializing this pre-individual nature. Now, if these are a given potential, if the pre-individual nature is a given potential of us as a human species being, then each one actualizes and modifies this potential in a singular manner without representing or exhausting it as a potential. For instance, if we take language or dancing as an idiom, the richness consists not in the mastery or excellence of one, but in all the variations which make it multiple. Now, the trouble is that neoliberal capitalism compels us as individuals to regard this potential as something that we ought to own and command as a property, as a self-possession, or at least we strive to coincide with it. And the error of individualism lies in the belief that we can appropriate that potential, and that in our actualizations of it, we can compete with each other, with the best versions of ourselves. But in fact, the opposite is true. And this brings to light the trans-individual dimension of the process. So for this potential to retain its function as a reserve for future transformations, it cannot be enclosed in private property. It must be reinvested and regenerated through multiple relations and exchanges that enrich it naturally and do not deplete it. And in one word, it has to become social commons, redistributed and shared through collective action and production. So how these relations become transindividual, for this we need one more argument that on the one hand harks back to the argument of superior usefulness of humans for their own self-preservation in a kind of leftist reading of Etienne Balibar's reading of Spinoza's ethics, and on the other hand, relations that should be better qualified in a leftist political theory of solidarity, according to feminist political thinker Sally Schultz, that we follow here. So to unpack this lineage, Spinoza recommends that nothing is more useful for a human than another human, not even oneself, therefore debunking this self-reliance myth. And this can be read in a right-wing perspective of individualism as instrumentalism, that we take advantage of each other for our own self-interest, kind of opportunism, or in a leftist perspective where there is a political forging of a path of becoming a community through establishing common utility above the individual's self-interest. And while this common in Spinoza's vocabulary is steeped in a kind of rationalism, we take it to mean solidarity in the concept of Sally Schultz, which is a unity that mediates between the individual and the community and is based on a mutual recognition of the common concern, which is pre-individual, that in turn implies a set of duties and obligations of justice to act with. And according to Schultz, there is a distinction between a social and political solidarity. On the one sense, the sense of obligation can differ and can be based on kinship and existing forms of sociality, or regardless of any possible similarity of actors, it can be based on political conviction and commitment. And for us, the prime example of this are social movements in South Europe, which are centered on solidarity and new municipalisms, which we won't discuss here, but I will just mention three features that they display. And that is that solidarity always arises out of an ordeal, an event that tests the individual in a crisis, making them break through the self-relation and seek out to make relations with others. And second, that it passes through a kind of dramaturgy of phases where the crisis must be collectivized through self-organization, potentially leading to new modes of political governance. And the third is the outcome of an open-ended heterogeneous we, which we could potentially probe as a political counter-subject. Now, as we announced that we want to talk about trans-individual futures and resituate it in art, the question arises if any of these characteristics of transindividuation, for instance, being an ecosystem of relations or solidarity based on common utility, or a political solidarity that strengthens an open-ended relational we, can be retraced in contemporary art, can be gauged in forms of collectivity and collaboration. And the example that I'm attracted to, because it's sort of emanated with a political enthusiasm, is Documenta 15, the exhibition that happens every 5 years, and the 15th edition happened in Kassel last summer. So I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this, but I would like to just rehearse this model through this example, because it promised a much more radical future of contemporary art than I thought that the art world was prepared for at that point. So appointing an artist collective from Indonesia, Ruang Grupa, meant that the whole exhibition was curated through a search for collectives, through making friends with collectives and art organizations on the basis of lumbung. Lumbung is this agrarian term in Indonesian for a rice barn where a village community stores their harvest together. I will accompany this with some of the drawings from the whole 3-year-long preparation of this large event. So this becomes a collective resource in face of an uncertain future, but it's also a metaphor that explains the possibility of putting financial resources in a central account to be managed together. And Lumbung, again, also an intervention by using a word that comes outside of European languages, is an operational model here. So it's a common pot where we first pool or define which resources are in our power and share resources. And sharing resources necessarily leads to sharing knowledge, histories, political struggles, but also evoking cosmologies and experimentation, using playfulness and humor. Because one collective cannot act alone or be self-sufficient. That was the conclusion on the basis of which Ruan Grupa started this quest of making friends with other collectives. So the path was to forge collectives of collectives in order to practice Lumbung. And this became a kind of open-ended invitation. So Ruan Grupa was joined by 5 individuals who together extended the invitation to 14 initiatives of those whose practices were close to Lumbung and who could commit to Lumbung as a building process. And from 14, the group of artists expanded to 53 collectives and individuals. So there's a considerable trust in making friends in a horizontal mesh, making what they call interlocal connections and deliberately avoiding the word networking or internationalism opposed to nation states. This 3-year-long process of preparing meant how to forge collectives of collectives worldwide. And the type of assembly that they used were majelis. Majelis, again, Arabic word, which means a meeting for bringing communal decisions. Sometimes this happens in going through circles. Sometimes a decision is not even made, but you end up with a very good nongkrong, another Indonesian word for getting together, hanging out. It's not about achievements, validations, but about spending time together, telling stories to each other. Now, why putting money first? Well, Documenta is known to have the highest budget as a mega art event, with collectors often making deals behind the scenes. But here the common pot meant that instead of maybe giving an income for everyone, allocating production money, fees, but also a common pot for the assemblies, for majelis, to decide how they would share. So there was an intervention in the spatio-temporal structure of Documenta, because Ruan Grupa didn't commission artists to make new works or exhibit existing works, but keep doing what you're already doing, and let's harvest. Let's harvest in the sense of learn strategies and approaches from one another, bring them back to local communities, and translate them to the context of Kassel, making new collective practices in Kassel resurface. And also the continuity encompasses also no difference between art production, social reproduction. It was important to spend time together, and instead of having artworks as objects, speaking to objects exclusively, here it was people, and places were designated as places for life where these exchanges could happen. So the question of, is this art, can a social relation have an aesthetic expression rendered obsolete? All these dichotomies that are productive of tensions in Western art tradition. I think even the humor was to pose the question, where is the art? So trusting that if time is given, it won't be wasted, because usefulness doesn't imply that we have something to exchange in a kind of transaction, but we collaborate just because we are. And the last example that I would like to end this brief introduction is to speak about something that happened beyond social solidarity. There's an edgier common to gather for and share. That's the political struggles and histories. An example is a work of expanded cinema by the collective Subversive Cinema from Ramallah and based in Ramallah and Brussels, titled Tokyo Reels. Subversive film investigates, restores, curates, and redistributes historical archives of overlooked militant or experimental films. And there is a large archive of international militant cinema since 1968, which was dedicated to the question of Palestinian struggle for self-determination. Now, it was believed that this archive disappeared when Israeli army confiscated it upon sieging Lebanon. But however, these films resurfaced and they were abandoned in a military store. So the story goes as follows. Upon showing their film, Off-Frame Aka Revolution Till Victory in Tokyo, Subversive Film were approached by a woman who discreetly handed them a list in Japanese with some English titles, which proved to be a collection of films by filmmakers from Britain, Italy, Germany, Palestine, Egyptian, Iraq, and so on, and Japanese, which were dubbed and screened in Japan between 1967 and 82. And these films contained PLO propaganda, experimental filmmaking, life of Palestinians in the refugee camps, but also tourist films about Palestine. So on the one hand, they unearthed a lost archive, but even more than that, they discovered a vibrant transnational political solidarity by reading meticulously the notes on the canisters and on the reels that describe the meetings that took place. The question arises, why were they shown in Japan in the 80s? And what could have prompted this connection between Palestine and Japan as two remote countries that bear little historical or cultural resemblance? And it proves that there's that the solidarity was based on anti-imperialism, a kind of anti-imperialist mood of the Japanese audiences that felt oppressed by the US after Second World War. And they not only sympathized, but also identified with the Palestinians. This is a view from Kassel. So if our present is saturated and burdened by a kind of crisis talk, which paralyzes imagination and a sense of possibility and change. When I was standing in the entrance of Documenta, I read political enthusiasm in the billboard that said, what can we potentially do with collective resources? And the question, what can we do, usually comes with urgency in situations of deficiency and precarity. To me, it always reads as, how can we share and redistribute the little we have left? But here the question was affirmative of an abundance, and there was an optimism about, we have a lot of resources if we, on the condition that we redistribute them collectively. And Documenta, as a mega art event, featured trans-individual solidarity and collective practices of the common. So as if the art world were populated with collectives and not individual artists, and with activities and practices and actions that were open-ended, sometimes messy, inconsistent, imperfect, inviting people to join, but without giving them a score to participate. So on the one hand, aesthetically, this means a total makeover of art. And a lot of people are wondering what will happen after Documenta 15. Will it return to presenting artworks signed by individual artists? And at the same time, it's a prefiguration of what we could do together, how we can act together, what can we do insofar as we are not alone, from art into society.
Sorry. Anyways, we don't need any video for a while, so I will switch it off. So in the second part of this lecture, I would like to elaborate a little bit on the role of technical objects in the process of individuation and transindividuation. And actually, I would like to start with an image. I just need to find it now. Wait. And this is an image. So, yes. I need to go back. No, I think I need to go the other way around. Okay, and just an image, like a painting that I find very interesting. So what we see here is a kind of traditional painting technique coming. Okay, sorry. So we see here a traditional technique which comes from Mithila region in India and Nepali, Nepali region. So it's a traditional wall painting developed by women, which used to decorate the walls of houses with this technique. But what we see and what is striking in this painting is actually is a very like modern, belongs to contemporary culture. It's a rocket, it's a spaceship. So there's already a kind of humor in the clash between this Asian technique, which we don't know necessarily without checking where it comes from, but it's clear that it's a kind of so-called naive painting and traditional technique, and a very modern technical object and technology. And I like that humor. That's how I actually started thinking about this painting a lot. And it's the artist who made it. It's called Komal Purbe, and it was made in 2019. And then I discovered that actually it's acrylic on paper, and that's new. That's invention. So actually, this artist, in our like revisited ontology and ontogenesis of human individual, should be understood in a very different way from how we typically or understand artists in the Western art world. So she's not a solitary genius. She continues a tradition. She uses the potential which is already there, and in which she comes into the world, which is the tradition of Mithila painting, and she actualizes it by making these paintings and repotentialize it by inventing and contributing with this new style of making paintings on paper, and somehow taking this traditional art form which belonged to women and household into the public scene. But then if we look closer into the painting, we see that the person who flies the rocket is a woman, which is also a very kind of improbable, and another layer of humor. And then if we look even more specifically into this woman, we can see that it's not a woman astronaut. It's a woman traditional folk I think, or yeah. So it's kind of traditional clothing. So we also understand that she comes from a specific place or specific region on Earth. And then for me, I thought, where is the humor? Where is the joke? The joke is that actually Nepali women don't fly rockets. And that's a very bitter humor for me. Bitter in our framework because this particular rocket would never come into existence without Nepali women feeding birds and dreaming about flying.
and then without painting the walls of their houses and experimenting with paintings and colors and on different surfaces. And then also without Nepali women engineers and inventors, and also Nepali women mothering future inventors and so on. So all that is to say that this rocket is full of the traditions, knowledge, dreams, and creativity of Nepali women, and where it stops being a joke is that they never have access to it. And this is then also social critique that we can understand from our framework and when we focus on the technical objects and techniques. And now I would like to explain in a little bit more like methodological or philosophical terms how this process of individuation and transindividuation happens by techniques and technical objects and by means of techniques and technical objects. Because it's a very short period of time, I would focus on only one small portion. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does it work? Does it work? Yeah. Maybe this one works better. Okay, I'm really trying to stay close to it, but I have a feeling that there is a problem. So Bernard Stiegler, a French philosopher, and Paolo Virno, Italian Marxist philosopher and activist, who Bojana mentioned, they really insisted on the world of material culture when discussing individuality and transindividuality. And for me, that's interesting because I also think that these notions shouldn't stay on a metaphysical level. They define our human conditions, which is social and material and so on, and they should be understood also from within that reality. And also, like to explain one like basic hypothesis of Bernard Stiegler from his book Techniques and Time, it's that technical objects, first of all, shouldn't be defined by their purpose for humans as a mere means. They should also be understood in their own essence, which is a kind of anti-anthropological proposal, like to think about how they have their own evolution and how they create a technological system and systems by relying to each other or referring to each other. So how a technique leads to a technique, or how a machine depends on another machine and so on, and then how the logic of technical innovations also follows certain evolution of technical objects, which is not necessarily controlled by humans. That's one hypothesis. And the other one is that technical objects are also kind of mnemotechniques, as Bernard Stiegler says, which means that they're also technologies of memory. And as technologies of memory, they play a very important role in individuation of humans and in bringing people together. The basic premise is that we tend to exteriorize a lot. And then Bernard Stiegler wrote also like a history of human exteriorization of experience and memory, from cage drawings so to different like legal treaties, writing, then making films, music records, DVDs, and so on and so on. And in that process, art is an interesting example of techniques as a kind of technology of memory, because it's like a main idea of making art is to capture a certain experience or memory and transmit it to other people. But what is interesting is if we understand art as a technical object and we try to understand the connections between art and other technical objects, we can also see that many other technical objects do the same thing, but although it's not their main purpose and goal. So, for instance, if you are thinking about, for instance, a car or a fridge or, I don't know, knife and so on, they're not made with an intention to transmit memory. They're made with an idea of, I don't know, cutting something or doing things or storing food. Nevertheless, when humans use these technical objects, they start transmitting memory. Because we exteriorize memory, as I said, we store it and we inscribe it in technical objects. And because of that, there is also certain circularity, because of which Stigler said that we made technical objects the same way we are made by technical objects. For instance, when you inherit, I will now read the part from one quote that is interesting for me. He said, when I inherit an object, a flint cutting tool, for example, I inherit through its mode of use the gestures, the motor behaviors that lead to the production of the flint cutting tool. So with the appearance of technical objects, a new stratum of memory is constituted, which permits the transmission from generation to generation of individual experience and permits mutualization in the form of what we call a we. That's for me interesting thought, and I would say that then we can go like just to see. Okay, so one, I would say like two aspects of this proposition, just to unfold them a little bit. So in the first step, I would propose to follow the following train of thoughts. We can say that for thousands of years, humans have exteriorized their individual memory and inscribed it in technical objects. And just to say that for Stigler, technical objects are tools and artifacts and artworks and so on. Not necessarily tools in a narrow sense. And then artworks are among these objects, technical objects, and as such can be understood as mnemotechnical devices, which are technical devices for storing, deleting, and transmitting memory. So films, music records, CDs, books, paintings, and so on conserve and transmit human experience, skills, knowledge, and visions from generation to generation, region to region, epoch to epoch, thereby also bringing people together. Artworks are thus always transindividual deeds, and an ecological art world could emerge from a resistance to commodification and privatization of the general intellect and creativity, reified as artworks, as Bojana before said, because it also hinders future transformation. But this understanding of art needs to be in this with a non-anthropological view of art, which has its own conceptual and material history. And then Simondon wrote in 1985 that which resides in machines is certainly only human reality, the human gesture set and crystallized into functioning structures. And then Stigler, having lived in the Western society of the in the Western society of the second half of the 20th century, had to correct Simondon and edit. But the industrial technical object, although being realized by humans, nevertheless results from an inventiveness that comes from the technical object itself. So as such, we can say that technical objects are other than human place, condition, and agent of human. I hope that it's clear, the logic. So not only that we transmit memory and experience by means of technical objects, but if we observe technical objects from a non-anthropological way and we try to follow their own evolution and development, we can see that the truth is also the other way around. That they bring us together, they take part in our individuation and so on. And they are active agents of our individuation. We live in the world of technical objects. That's a human condition. And that's not new. New is that, of course, these technical systems that became complex technologies, we can control them less and less. But ontologically, we have never been able to control them because they have their own materiality and history and so on and so on. On a methodological level or philosophical level, to understand how actually this process of transindividuation function at the place and by technologies, I would introduce a specification of memory that Bernard Stiegler developed, also referring to some other European philosophers. So he distinguished between three types of memory, which form this metastable condition of human socialization, individuation, and intersubjectivization. One is genetic memory of the species, which is inscribed in our genetic code. Then there is something which is called epigenetic memory. So this is other than genetic memory, which is acquired through the central nervous system and corresponds to the individual's experience of events, faces, music, films, and so on. And then there is the third type of memory, which is technological memory. And in Stigler's vocabulary, it's epiphylogenetic because it brings together techniques and language, like way of inscription. And it is stored in technical systems and transmitted through objects, as I mentioned, like such as legal treatises, music records, photographs, films, and so on. So this epigenetic memory, the second time, which is acquired through the nervous system, it depends on the individual human who supports it, and it gets lost with the loss of that individual. So it is the life itself that bears and supports that memory. The third type of memory, technological memory, is expressive of something else. It's expressive of this structural coupling of human being and machine, or in Stigler's vocabulary, of the cortex and the tool. So technological memory immediately has a social and political dimension because the individual acquires it from their social surroundings. That's not their primary memory. It's secondary. We acquire it from the surroundings, and once interiorized, it influences the individual's own experience and behavior. And in addition, I would also like to inspire us to think about a political dimension of the relation between epigenetic and technological memories. And I would propose the following questions. Which memory deserves and has rights to be stored and transmitted? And which one is destined to be lost and forgotten? And which individuals as social subjects deserve and have rights and access to store and transmit their memories? While formulating that question, I had in mind my grandmothers. I had 3 of them, which were amazing storytellers, and in whose they were like mostly housewives, but their heads were full of knowledge and creativity, from making cinnamon cookies to making Molotov cocktails in the Second World War to curing inflammation of tonsils and so on, and knowing many like social justice poems by heart and so on. So I, in a way, come from that family of storytellers, but they're all dead. And I thought, but their stories are also going to die with them. And then, inspired by some feminist thinkers, such as Adriana Cavarero, Ursula Le Guin, and Svetlana Alexievich, together with my partner, Marta Popivoda, who is a film and video maker, I made a movie with my one of grandmothers as a kind of feminist intervention in an attempt to preserve the memory which is not destined to be preserved. And I would like to show a very short excerpt from that film. It's a feature documentary. And for that, I would also need sound. The movie's title is Landscapes of Resistance. It's a very specific cinematographic technique. But for now, I would just like to share one story that we somehow preserved and conserved, and she died in the meantime. Yeah, can be maybe.
Bili su me poslali u Mionicu da izvidim kakva je situacija u žandarmerijskoj stanici, koliko ima žandara i to, jer hoćemo da izvršimo napad na žandarmerijsku stanicu. I pošto sam ja bila žensko i mogla se presvući u seljanku ići, ja sam krenula rano ujutru i moj muž me ovako ispratio na jedan proplanak. Iz šume malo smo izašli na proplanak i kaže meni čuvaj se. Pazi dobro da ne naletiš negde u neku zasedu, a ja imam seljačku suknju i seljačku bluzu, opankici, marama na glavi, ali u džepu jednu bombu i oko pojasa na kajšu revolver. Ja se s njim pozdravljam i odjedanput u meni neka tuga. Ću ga više vidjeti. I okrenem se i vratim se. I kažem, hoćeš da mi napišeš nešto ovdje? Na neki blokčić koji sam imala. A on kaže, šta ti pa da napišem, šta da ti napišem? Pa napiši mi bilo šta. Hoću da imam od tebe. I on uzeo onaj blok, stavi meni na leđa i napisan, Mićo moj, čuvaj mi se dobro. Tvoj Saša. Potpiše. Vraćam se iz te akcije, idem prema tim kućama i dolazim jednoj seoskoj kući, kažem, jesu naši tu dole? A one žene nešto, ovako se trgoše nešto, pa ne pogledaš. Ja kažem, šta je? Ma ništa, idi dole, oni će ti kazati. Dobro, ja krenem dole, nizbrdo nekom stazom u šumicu. Sretnem na stazi doktora Dragana Jovanovića, zubnog lekara koji je već bio sa nama u odredu. I on kako ide, kako me ugleda, on stade i oko obori glavu. Ja kažem, Dragane, šta ti je? A on kaže, Sava je pao. Ja počnem da plačem. Hoću da se ugušim. A tu stoji Steva, radnik, koji je obešen na trgu u Valjevu i držao se junački. On se vrlo hrabro držao. I to je primjer, njegov spomenik je podignut više Valjeva tako kako on stoji, uzdignute glave ovako pred vešanima sa onim oko vrata. A on meni kaže, što plačeš? Nemoj da budeš kukavica. Pošli smo u borbu da ginemo, da se borimo za slobodu i da ginemo. A ja, ja plačem, ne mogu da se uzdržim. A stari Dragojlo kaže, plači, dete moje, plači, bit će ti lakše. Oplakuj svoga druga, imaš koga da oplakuješ.
Okay. This was a short excerpt, and for us it was important not for family reasons to make the film, but also to bring about a different story about the anti-fascist resistance, which is not this big monumental history of the struggle, and that's also like typical for feminine storytelling, at least as Adriana Caballero would say. Anyways, for us that was a kind of on one hand like trying to save these stories, and then we also went on and we tried to make interviews with anti-fascist female fighters from former Yugoslavia, those who were still alive at that time. They were already all in their 90s and late 90s and so on, but we managed to find them and to make these last interviews and so on. So we also collected a lot of materials. We thought it's a kind of mission. So somehow we cannot accept in our society, which is totally devastated, which is now neoliberal capitalist, which is nationalist, which revisited the history of anti-fascist struggle. And so we cannot stand that these memories will be lost with the loss of these people. So that was a project that we did. There are two maybe also things to say about this process of storing memory. That in Stigler's philosophy, I would say that the movie is also a kind of illustration, not on purpose illustration, but can serve as an illustration of Stigler's thesis that this epiphylogenetic memory or technological memory is a twofold process. It is on the one hand a kind of a posteriori exteriorization of memory. So for instance, we here recorded events remembered and told by my grandmother. Although, as I said, this exteriorization of memory can also be a less conscious process. So for instance, making a flint cutting tool, as I said, is based on the experience of scraping a deer hide and observing how a sharper stone's edge would help, and that's so it's a kind of lateral effect. But at the same time, phylogenetic memory is not only an a posteriori exteriorization of memory, it has also retroactive dimension, which rewrites our memory and past and so on. So even when we observe it as a very personal experience, and also on the wider social level. So in that sense, this collective memory also indicates the transindividual dimension of art and other technical objects as a kind of ontopolitical capacity, which is sometimes realized, sometimes more as a deliberate choice, sometimes it just happens. And what is connected to that, and maybe most interesting part, is that this retroactive dimension of memory formation does not only turn towards the past, it's also an anticipation. And it influences our future behavior and perception, which is also the main hope of this film, to inspire future resistance in today's Europe, with struggles with the rising nationalism and fascism and so on. And then in a way, we can say that as such, this technology of memory as an agent of human individuation, it, like Prometheus, leads our knowledge, dreams, and memory to the future. And like Epimetheus, Prometheus' brother, it forgets, fails, and withdraws into the past as a never fully exhausted potentiality of thinking, dreaming, experiencing, and so on. And if we think about art as a technology of memory in this sense, maybe we can also start thinking about art enabling the process of individuation simultaneously in multiple temporalities, which may have their own calendars of cosmological time, as were their speeds and rhythms. And maybe that's not just a fantasy or metaphor, maybe it's what's materially happening with that. And the last note that I would like to introduce, or a thought that I would like to introduce here, is that like if we say that we withdraw from technologies of memory, that's the condition of being human and individuating as human. If we draw from technologies of memory, who or what controls their content? Or in Stigler's words, what power, French word pouvoir, do we have over power in sense of puissance? So on the one hand, we can say the domination of the capitalist mode of production gives power over technology to capitalists rather than to workers, engineers, technologists, and users. And that power manifests in using economic system predicated on profit and growth to regulate technological system. So for instance, patent rights and licensing, predicted obsolescence of devices, calculated profitability and limits put to machines, etc., as well as in exploiting our general intellect, creativity, and social memory reified in commodifiable technical objects, as we already said several times. But on the other hand, the real challenge of a non-anthropological apprehension of technique is to understand that we humans can never control the content of technical objects, or this social memory which is described in them, because techniques has its own evolution, as I also already said. And then speaking about the content of technology of memory, at the end I would like to indicate that the stored memory is not only something to celebrate as a precious treasure of humanity. Art and other technical objects store, unwillingly or willingly, also the memory of killing and gore, crimes, expropriation of land, appropriation of the cultures, stealing, excluding, forgetting. And I think we should think about that when using technical devices such as this computer or iPhone, or visiting big museums in Paris and London, adoring pyramids in Egypt, or even sitting in this very building. Because the paradox of exteriorization, as Stigler said, led us to say that human and the tool invent each other, and there is something like, and they invent each other, which means that through using the artifacts as mnemotechnical devices, we repotentialize the past we inherit through those artifacts and technologies, where repotentializing also means that we can repurpose, revisit, and redirect them. And in that process, I think it's really most important to think about how the space for new voices and new desires can appear, and how to enhance their inscription in our trans-individual futures and reify them in technical objects which we share. So maybe that's the end. It's already, I think we used all the time. So we can also stop here and then open this for some questions and comments, and then we can integrate some other theses and thoughts in that. So thank you. What shall we do with the mic? Shall we share the mic or send one to the people and then? Yeah, now it's yeah. Okay. Now it works. Yeah.
Thank you again for coming. Anna, I wanted to ask specifically to continue what you were saying about technical objects, memory, and neoliberalism, but specifically about sort of like a sense of like eternal presentism, or like a future being closed off, and how memory plays into like a loss of the future and potentially a loss of the past as well.
Okay, but probably there are many thoughts about that, but within, like, to stay consistent with this philosophical framework, I would say that actually technical objects are also, as mnemotechnical devices, they're also like means and agents of bringing past to the present, in which we come to the world. So we come to the world, we exist in the world in the present, but that present is informed by the past. And that's why I said in the last part of the lecture, it's really important to understand whose past is present and whose past has a right and access to these technologies of memory, and whose past gets lost, and then how we can intervene into that, how we can do and also use art for that, not in an instrumental way, but also in trying to understand what happens with the human individuation in that passage from non-being to being, as art is poiesis and creative process, which brings something non-existent into the world. And that it could be a lost social memory, for instance, and forgotten events, especially crimes, and these acts of appropriation, expropriation, and so on, especially when we speak about Western civilization in which we live. And in Stigler's philosophy, this type of memory work is anticipation, and it's anticipation not only in political and social sense, it's also anticipation in terms of how our memory individually works. So once you have a knowledge of a melody, next time when you hear the first note, you can anticipate the next one and so on. So even when you think about the perception and the memory and like temporal dimension of memory, it's already present. And also if we think about larger social projects, and that's why I said like this kind of anticipation is the main hope of this film. We didn't make the movie in order to celebrate that woman. We made the movie somehow trying to preserve the memories of that communist, anti-fascist fighters and so on, in order to inspire and to find new bodies, to inspire new resistance today, and to find this parallels. And that's how it functions. I mean, I don't know, the movie doesn't have that power, but hypothetically, many movies have that power. You know what I mean? So in these terms, I am also like very interested in thinking about this futurist potentiality of storing and transmitting memory.
This is mostly a clarity question for me. Can you clarify the difference between art as a technical object and art as an artifact, and then how they function differently?
But in this specific, let's say, part of the whole philosophy, actually there is no big difference, because both are seen as technologies of memory, and both are seen as techne, as poiesis. So in this term, but in real life there are some differences. But in this philosophical system there is no fundamental difference, because they share these two functions and properties. And where I would introduce a difference, which I mentioned here, is that usually the content, the memory, or the experience which is stored in artworks is usually a deliberate choice of an artist. So we make, for instance, this movie with a clear idea that we want to transmit this particular memory, this particular experience, and so on. While, for instance, when you make iPhone as a technical object without these artistic ambitions and people who work, you make it with other idea, with other purposes. You want to make people like to communicate and so on. Nevertheless, as a technology of memory, it also transmits experience, memory, and so on and so on. So that's I would say the main difference in purely technical objects or industrial technical objects. It's a lateral fact which happens when humans use them, but it's not deliberately and consciously inscribed in them. They are technologies of memory because of how we use them and the function that they play for us. While artworks, we know they're not like that. Although sometimes they try to store and transmit one experience and memory, but it because of change of the context and historical moment and so on, it turns out to be something else. And how we experience them and what they do for us is something else. But normally and originally, there is a clear idea and a project of an author, and today it's even very professional artists write projects. I want to do this and that. They apply for money, they get it, they make it, and they let it live in the world with these specific inscriptions in them. That's how I would define it.
I'll bend the rules slightly so I can talk more easily. This issue of memory is an obsession of mine for a very long time, because of how rotten my memory has been, I think, in part. And of course, a lot of the traditions in art are about the distortion of memory and how fascinating the distortions are and how we can never get back to the original one and so forth. But I think part of what your talk is about is that the computer, like the photograph, has forced us to see a blind reproduction of data, right? And it's challenging our whole notion as to what we mean by distortion or whatever. And it seems like it's partly about this moment. I'm going to stop here because you're nodding, which means you have something you can say to it. It's a very big question, I know, but I'm interested in what this sparks in you to chat about. I'm interested in this notion of distortion of memory being such a vital part of Western culture, certainly, right? And the way and how the distortions are studied almost more than the actual memories themselves, but that the technical memory, in other words, the fact that there's now machinery, right, that intercedes and gives us almost what we don't want to see. You know, like what's the whole history that photograph sees what we turn our eyes away and don't want to notice. So it's an old story, but this problem is very interesting to me, and I have a feeling it's part of your talk and your concerns. So I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say than my blathering on about my
Yeah,
question.
I think it's a really great comment. For me, I'm more like focused on the struggle how to preserve certain memory, but it's a very important question because also in our own region we have this so-called historical revisionism, where the whole story about fascism, anti-fascism, capitalism, anti-imperialism, now it's totally confused, and the historical narratives have changed over time several times. So it's a big thing to try to see how things were back then. But that's when we speak about art as a specific way of manipulating with memory and, as I say, making selection, making specific interpretation, and so on and so on. And that's a very big question, an important question. While I think when we speak about industrial technical objects and technological systems, in a strange way, I think that they cannot lie.
That's what we love to lie, and they won't let us.
Yes, in a way, that's really interesting. So we it's not only, we need to learn how to read that and how to understand that we are connected with other people, with the other generations, with other regions through that. And what is inscribed, what are these knowledges? And that's maybe when we go back to this first painting that I showed, that's exactly how humor functions. Because it's absurd, to imagine a traditional Nepali woman in a rocket. And that's, that's because of that memory which is stored in the object and commodified into in a rocket that nobody has access to, and
there
so
might
on.
be shapes in the history of Indian crafts that ironically resemble a rocket.
I totally believe in that. I think that they were.
Is it true?
Yeah, there's like the yeah, it's like the Pushpa Viman, the flying vehicle that Robin done. Yeah. But Indian women in saris did do the crafting and the coding that got them to the moon or aircraft. So it's not as absurd as it sounds.
No, that's totally, I'm just saying it's absurd. That's on which the humor relies, but that's not absurd. It's something that is totally not funny. And this whole theory should say that this rocket doesn't lie. So we need to understand what experience and memories it contains. And that's when we understand that, then we will understand that it's not absurd, that this woman should be there. Why not? Because she did a lot as an individual human from Nepal. She did a lot, and her mother did a lot, and grandmother and ancestors, they did a lot in order for us to have the rocket. So of course that she should be there. But that's why I said the humor is very bitter and dark, because what is said is that it's absurd. That's the thing.
Yeah. I guess you could say that what's more surgical than humor anyway? Humor is the most surgical way to cut something open. Anyway, so someone else wants to speak now.
Ron Grupa. And I think in the book, you really take transindividuality as a model for collectivity, social gathering, social organization. And in the example of Ron Grupa, it seemed that, and I think in the book, there's this kind of insight as well. Art has a special or the institution of art has a special responsibility in a way for the hyper-individualism of sort of neoliberal society. And then it seems to, in that example you gave, have possibilities for undoing that and for modeling other forms of collectivity. And I was just interested in sort of maybe hearing you talk about that a little bit more, and how trans individuality is a model for collectivity, past, present, and future, sort of infused. And then what, if art has this particular relationship to trans individuality, to the politics of solidarity. And
So I didn't start by saying that I was very surprised 2 months after our book was published that I was in Kassel, and if Kassel is a showcase of the art world, then it's a very different art world than the one I thought I inhabited when we were writing the book, and taking issue with art as being the site of intense performing of the self and the hyper-individualism that comes with the neoliberal market. And that, I think, had a lot to do with the collective practices that are outside of the Western-centric and art world and Europe, and that a lot of themes that have marked Western art around the relative autonomy of art, the relationship between art and politics, so art and life, art into life, life into art, or work and non-work, somehow became obsolete. Institutional critique became obsolete. It seems that these were not tensions for so many collectives that were also somehow unknown. They haven't been featured in the art biennials largely. So it really projected another image, and it was some kind of back to the future that seems to me much more radical than the economy that supports art institutions in Europe, which is the context in which I work. And that there was a lot of courage in opening it up in a way that also the exhibition itself was somehow immanent to the artists as participants, and we were asked to become some kind of companions that could maybe only continue Lumbung somewhere else. Somehow the viewer became obsolete. The idea also of spectatorship and how art mediates itself for its importance. So I thought that there was something very futurist, and on the other hand, a lot of it was based on the political experiences of Indonesia, and Ruang Grupa descends from Taring Padi, which is a more political collective based on solidarity, on revival of communism and non-aligned movement. It was a group of students and activists who started in 1998 after the fall of Suharto and his regime that oppressed communists in Indonesia. So even though what was maybe primary there was a kind of social solidarity, it was backed up with other political experiences. And I chose to speak about Tokyo Reels because it's a case of political solidarity that tries to redeem a history, to claim that this revolution may still be possible, and that the question of self-determination of Palestine is not buried in history, even though international politics give us that feeling. So that's where but today I was speaking mostly about the social relations that art is capable of. But because there is no really distinction between what is a production of art and what is a social relation that it belongs to the reproduction of society, we can easily swap that exhibition for practices of self-organization in life and political activity. And that kind of indiscernibility or this double perspective that Documenta 15 offered was powerful or radical for me.
I have another question about what you were saying earlier about trans-individuation and it arising out of a moment of crisis. And a thought occurred to me about the kind of, I guess, shock doctrine, right? And how crisis can yield these other kinds of neoliberal policies that are like waiting in the wings in order for the confusion that results from crisis to take hold and then move resources out of the public domain into private hands. And do you have any thoughts about what kind of precipitates that crisis into the solidarity versus the potential kind of reification of the neoliberal strategy?
I believe that it really depends on contexts, and in contexts where there would be a history of resistance and communal experiences, then, and if immiseration reaches such a degree that people don't see how they will survive, and that possibly leads to transindividuation. But of course, for that, there has to also be political initiatives that are at the same time also waiting, like neoliberal policies on the, that in a moment of shock can come in and take over. So are other political actors waiting the opportune moment to collectivize, to socialize the crisis, to act against individualism. And that depends on the context. As long as there are enough pockets of privilege, there will be people who will resist a more wholesale mobilization. And the more a society is pauperized in crisis, the more there's a chance that those from a more radical left spectrum of politics will also act in that moment and help articulate a commitment to another future and another project.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Is it possible to screen any of the radical films that you discussed, the Palestinian and Japanese films? Is there any, or stream any of those? I'm sorry, this is a very boring question, but I want to see them.
I'm not sure. I don't think that they're available online, but there is also a film that's it is a documentary about the Tokyo Reels, and this one is being screened at festivals. But I haven't mentioned that because I also didn't want to open the. There's a large controversy around, which is not a. It was an assault on concretely subversive film and part of Ruan Grupa for an accusation of anti-Semitism by showing films that are clearly critical of the Israeli state. Tokyo Reels. Tokyo Reels is the title, and you will find the website of Tokyo Reels with subversive film. Yeah, under subversive.